Given an extra minute or so here, we've still got some folks trying to get connected. So it is the state of the world we live in, of schedules and time. And I promise to keep you on track this morning, and we'll do what we need to do, get you some resources and some additional information this morning. All right, a few more folks logging in here. We're gonna get going here very, very shortly. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. Hello, nice to see some familiar faces too. How fun is that? Hey, Steve. All right, good. We may have a few more folks join us. That's okay. I promise to get us started and ended on time because I wrap half of Iowa Valley continuing education. This is an investment of time, so thank you for taking the time out to do this. My job is to make it worth your time, so we'll work on that. All right. Good. A few other folks joining us here. Those of you who have not.
Audio is breaking up bad.
Okay.
Selena, it's breaking up really bad. Is anybody else having trouble hearing it?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It's like muffled a little bit, in and out.
Okay, let's, I will put plenty here. Let's do this. Okay, we've got a few more folks coming in here. I'm just going to switch. All right, a few more folks coming in there, so we'll try and get them added in. I am not sure why we are getting, I've already been on with one session this morning, so why we're having.
It sounds good now. Can you hear us?
Something came through with some feedback there. I can hear you all fine. So let's try it. Let's see if it straightens out. Otherwise, I will switch gears and we'll go to another plan B. All right. But please feel free to keep giving me that feedback.
We should all put ourselves on mute probably, huh?
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit of housekeeping. This gets to be as interactive as you want to make it this morning. It is helpful just from a sound process that if you do mute yourself and unmute yourself to talk, it does help with background.
Hey, Selena, you are breaking up again. I'm sorry. You are breaking up.
Oh, that's okay. It's so weird. Okay, let me try one more thing here.
That if you are welcome to jump in. Certainly this is interactive. We're going to learn some things about online training today too, some pros and cons that happen because it all goes to our topic today of leading and engaging teams virtually. How we connect this way when we can't be near each other as often. So we're going to do that in a variety of ways today. You have some content from me this morning that was attached in your email. So please take a look for that. If you did not get the email, if somebody else told you to show up, but you did not get the email or the handouts, please drop a message in the chat. And Nisa's going to help us out by sending that out to you. So please drop your email in the chat room if you still need that handout and attachments. Now, there's some things we've learned, especially in 2020, about virtual training. And Zoom can be a super resource. It can connect us in some new ways, whether it's Zoom or Teams, etc. We also just know that technology has gremlins, is what I'm calling them. And so all of a sudden when I've been, now the gas guys have started up again. So this is just the way my morning is going to go. Even though I've been on since 7:30, I had a group of 250 employees this morning on at 7:30 with me, and technology may work just fine. As soon as you switch, technology also can not be working, even if all it was. So we just roll with the gremlins and we figure it out as we need to. You have the chat room. So those of you who are newer to Zoom, if you scroll across the bottom of your screen, you'll see a bubble there with a chat balloon. Feel free, drop notes in there, talk to each other, comment on whose cat walks by if you're working from home. If you have things that you want to be able to share with each other, that is fine. We're also going to try a few other things this morning, some things that I have found really helpful. We have the opportunity for small room breakouts, so we'll be able to try a few of the other features. If you've not tried them before, it's just nice to kind of add that into our experience this morning. So our topic that was chosen to be able to support all of you as leaders and team members in your organization was leading and engaging teams virtually. While we were doing some of this pre-2020, 2020 certainly upped our ante on this. So even if you don't have a lot of team members right now that have been geographically dispersed, we just know that a lot of the leader engagement activities have been tried and true for a long time. What we see in 2020 and with the amount of virtual contact that we now have, we just have to be that much more intentional about it. We have to really think about how we're leading and building our teams, not only across departments and across shifts, but across locations and in constantly changing scenarios where maybe people were on site and now they're off site. And now they're on site and then they're off site. So let's do this. We're going to start off with a chat exercise, and I'm going to ask a few folks to give some shout outs, but I want you to think about what is most challenging for you now when it comes to communicating and engaging virtually. So what's challenging you the most in terms of staying in touch with maybe people who've been relocated, maybe the social distancing part? What's challenging you? Could be one item, could be 5 items, whatever's challenging you. I'm going to ask you to drop it into the chat. So again, to find the chat, scroll across the bottom of your screen, click on the balloon, it should pop up on the right side of your screen. What's challenging you the most when it comes to engaging with your teams virtually? So if you can drop a message into the chat, I see some coming up there. You don't have the same type of conversations over Zoom, right, that you would have over lunch. So the way we're connecting is different, right? If we think about just keeping people involved, less meaningful conversations, it feels less personal, right? Keeping people connected, nice comments, right? Lots of things have changed. And so while things have, Jason, I love your comment that a lot of things have changed, right? But we haven't missed a day or changed much at all. So maybe our business is the same. We're still producing what we produce. We serve who we serve, but we're still doing that. But so much of life around us maybe has shifted, or the conversations about it. Finding time to communicate. Chrissy, I appreciate your comment to that of just being that much more intentional. We're even seeing a little bit, if I add my organizational psychologist hat to this a bit, just a little more fog or a little bit less clarity. So we're having to switch that around to being really clear. What do I really have to get done today? Prioritization becomes important. Tracy, to your point, not everybody has the same access to technology. So whether that's internet connection and bandwidth and cameras and sound quality, right? Different kinds of technology can also shift that around. So thank you for offering those, and certainly welcome to keep adding things if you didn't get something added in there, if you think of something else. Plenty of challenges. So what I love about a couple of those comments is that while lots of things have changed, some things have not changed. How we take care of customers, the fact that we need good employees to want to work with your companies and stay with your companies. So really considering what has changed, but what has not changed this year. We're adding in some new options. So it has highlighted opportunities for us to collaborate at a different level. But what that also means for us as companies is that we've got to be really clear on what methods of technology we're using. And it's not just about the app or the gadget or the platform. It's how we're really getting work done. Good. Thank you. So as we get into this, I will share some stories along the way with you. One of the things that I want to be able to support your efforts in is just encourage you and add some tools and help you think through some things today that you can apply back out for the rest of today and for the days to come. And from my own experience of going through, what virtual is not new this year, but we're seeing a new hybrid approach. We're seeing new opportunities for us to collaborate and connect differently as a result of what we've had to experience in 2020, recognizing that many of our business strategies, many of the elements of our business have stayed the same. It's just that some things have shifted. Now, in my own world, I'll tell you what, in the middle of March was not a great profession to be in, of being a speaker in front of groups of people, right? As somebody who's been doing this 12 years full time, had a full schedule, and somewhere in the middle of March went, what? It's completely gone in 3 days. Now, what I also had to remember in that moment, well, I was probably having a pretty big pity party for myself, was to remember, wait a minute, the relationships are there. The people are still there. We just need to do this differently. And somewhere within a week or two, I went, wait a minute, I'm a workplace psychologist. This should kind of be my shtick. This should be something I'm digging into. And ever since then, I don't think I've taken too much of a pause, because we've really had to wrestle with, in our businesses, we take some different protocols, we take some different safety measures, maybe we're trying to work with people in different locations differently. But the people part is still the same. How we take care of people still matters. So I want to start that off with some ideas this morning. I'm going to go ahead and put up a screen share and just take you through some key points as we get started in the handout today. And you're going to notice a couple of things. You're going to see the screen share here up on mine, and I'm going to do this a couple of different ways, but I'm going to show the handout just for now. Our reality check is that definitions of teams are rapidly changing. So what does this look like to work together? If you're still co-located in the same space, but you're now shifting in terms of maybe some safety protocols or how we do this work, but even just really thinking about what does that look like for you going ahead? We always, with leading and engaging teams virtually, need to name what's possible and recognizing the truth before virtual. And here's what I mean. Some of the patterns I've noticed with companies is that companies were struggling before 2020, it either got them on task and focused, or they're struggling even more when it comes to people and engagement and taking good care of our teams. And so really think about what your goal is for this session, whether it was just, hey, I'm looking for some additional training this morning, or I've heard Selena before and you decided to come back and hang out with me for a little while this morning, or you were looking for some tools to take back to your teams. Lots of ways that we have flexibility to take on the conversations this morning. So what you have on this first page are our 10 summary areas for this morning. We're going to break those down, though. You'll see in the coming pages of what that looks like for each of us and how we apply these to both co-located teams, all of you who are still together in a common space, and for those of you who've been geographically dispersed, maybe working more from home, maybe trying to be a leader with your team that maybe is not back together yet. And we're going to work on 10 best practices with some tools, maybe some, for even those of you who've seen me before, hopefully some new tools you've not seen before with some new content this year. Same corny sense of humor, new content. Okay, so simply that first page is our summary. 10 core areas that we're going to spend the time working on this morning and hopefully give you some things to think about. So let's talk reality check for here just a minute, right? Engagement was already a factor prior to 2020. Just because we're seeing more virtual dispersion doesn't mean engagement is less needed. Virtual is still unknown. Some of you are in teams that have been separated for 6 months. Some of you are on teams that have not been separated for 6 months, and maybe you're wishing you were, right? But we know that performance remains more important, that we've got to continue to look at our businesses, whatever type of organization, profit, nonprofit, whatever your purpose is, you still have to perform. And so I believe that there are some lessons learned coming out of this year of being really even more clear about purpose and strategy, of having some good, honest, hard conversations about what's priority. That the nature of the work may feel like it's shifted because we're in different spots, but at the end of the day, right, our customers want us to take good care of them. And as a leader, this becomes even that much more important. So today, we want to increase some awareness about skills. We want to set some reasonable goals, because if you leave this particular training with about 10 things to do, you're going to go to your to-do list and go, oh, that's too much. That's okay. But make a plan and stick to it. Maybe there's one area you want to focus on, and I'm going to be adding those in all morning long. For example, maybe it's just you've been pretty good at talking to some team members regularly, but there's a couple you just keep missing because they're independent, they do their work, and you don't have to check in with them as often. Maybe your goal coming out of this morning would be just to be really intentional that over the next couple of days, you're going to set aside 15 minutes just to truly check in with them and see how they're doing. So I want you to be able to set some reasonable goals for this morning of what comes next after this session. Because we've all sat in training sessions before, right? Where we're there, we're doing what we need to do, and we leave and go, that's nice. And we take our stack of materials and put them on stack of other materials and go, I got to get back to work. So really think about what could you do a little bit differently today, not just because it's me, but because you've invested this time to say, how do we make sure we're engaging people at a higher level? All right. So we're going to take on our first one for this morning, and it really is around roles, responsibilities, and expectations. So this was a challenge before 2020, and we've got to think a little bit differently if we're co-located or we're virtually located. And so I have a couple of questions here that I want you to think for a moment, and we're going to apply this in a scenario. Who's doing what? When will you be available to each other? How long does it take to get back to one another? And what method should be used to notify each other if the availability changes? So there are some patterns that I have seen over years where if roles and responsibilities are not clear, we have more miscommunication. More miscommunication damages trust, and damaged trust just keeps filtering right back through. So it's been interesting for me to watch with companies and walk alongside. I'm still on site at some companies where we're having conversations about when maybe the work has shifted or people have had to take on different roles and responsibilities, who's doing what. And being really intentional and clear about that, because if you had teams that moved off site, maybe even more so, and they haven't been back on site, it probably highlighted if there were any gaps in your processes, or even if there were things that needed to be done that you're not sure who's covering now. I really believe that when we look at the basis of great teamwork, the foundation of that being trust, when I know who does what, when we know what to expect out of each other, it causes less misunderstanding, which means it has the potential to increase trust. So maybe in your team, it's that clarification around who's doing what, where has the work shifted, and what do we need to make sure people are clear on. We also know that there's some concern around what does the work hours look like? When do we connect? When do we not connect? When are we available to each other? So somewhere in the middle of April, as I was having conversations with a number of companies, we were seeing something with an uptick, and I want to share it with you. I thought it was fascinating, is that the complaints of micromanagement went up in April, and they still are, interestingly enough. So some of the research that was looking at it is that employees are complaining that there's more micromanaging going on during 2020 than they had seen before. Consider what that looks like for a minute, excuse me, is that when in some companies, and I recognize this doesn't apply to everybody, but for many of you it does. When managers moved off site, or we moved off people from the company location that could do their work independently from home typically, their visibility changed. So now they couldn't pick up on the same visual cues. Or even if, I've even heard this from HR folks who were on site, who didn't move off site, but they don't leave their office as much because they're not supposed to be out on the floor or moving in different departments because again of social distancing. So people were complaining of more micromanagement, which happened because managers who used to be involved and taking cues just visually and walking through the floor and having casual conversations got off site or secluded to their office and went, but I need to be productive. So they started sending messages like, got an update on that? Got an update on that? Where are you at with this? Because as a manager, I needed to feel productive. And the employee who was there serving, caring for, whatever that was, went, back off. Give me a little space. I got this. But you're asking me 3 times in 10 minutes where we're at with this, and I even haven't had a chance to go check on the first thing. So maybe think about that for you today, has your visibility changed? Do you have some of the same visual cues or indicators? We're going to talk a little bit more about dashboards and metrics in a little bit, but where has that work shifted, and have you taken on things that you didn't expect to take on? I think it also, when it comes to roles and responsibilities and expectations, shifted a conversation around succession planning this year, of that if somebody couldn't speak to us from the hospital tomorrow, who knows what? And how deep are we in people who can cover for other people? And I hope that is a lesson learned coming out of 2020 for our businesses and our organizations, that we need to make sure core processes and critical procedures are known, so they're documented, and that there's somebody who can cover them if somebody else has to step away. Because right now we still know the reality that I may be on site today, but I may be off site tomorrow for 2 weeks. And what does that look like? So that also shifts some of those expectations. We're also saying just what the travel time is. So if I send you an email at 8 o'clock this morning, when should I expect a response? And we still know, it was true before COVID, that some people are spot on. The moment a message, text message, email hits them, they're on it. There are some people who check at the beginning of the day, the middle of the day, the end of the day. And there's still some people on our teams that are checking 3 days later, right? So what is the expectation about us getting back to each other? And if I tell you, if I'm now working off site and I need you as my team contacting me, and I say I'm available, and these are the hours I'm available, but now I put on a do not disturb to work on a project this afternoon. When do I notify you of that? And when do you just know that, oh, well, if it's urgent, I can contact her, but if it's not urgent, I'll wait. So we just see some shifts in availability for people who are off site, how they really make sure that their team knows, I'm here, I'm available to you, and I want to be able to be supportive. So we're seeing that more with geographically dispersed teams now, that they have to be that much more intentional. Do you have this? I got this. What's our expectation on this? When can I contact you? When can I not contact you? So if we take on that first piece, right, of really thinking about roles, responsibilities, and expectations, I would love to hear, you can either drop it in chat or unmute. Does anything in that ring true for what you're experiencing or what you've been challenged by these last months and trying to connect on who's doing what and what are the expectations for communication? Anyone want to build on that or add in an example? Check out the chat room here, see if we've got anything else there. How has visibility changed? How have your communication patterns changed? Or what have you been trying to do to be that much more intentional about what you're working on and how you share that information? Thoughts or additions you'd like to make to that?
I guess I'll kind of volunteer
Thanks,
some
Steve.
input. Good morning. I guess I have always worked from home in the sales role. So it, in one sense, it has not been a tremendous transition for me, but I try to be as available and responsive as I can. But that always gravitates towards email. And even on the sales side, working with customers, they're clearly favor email over answering the phone or returning phone, that. And I'm interested today to understand through the virtual and the Zoom discussions, interaction with customers also.
Okay.
I mean, I know the topic is relative to
That's okay.
leading our own teams and communicating internally with our teams. And we're not doing that virtually. We kind of do what we've always done that way. But, from the customer standpoint, I've had very little interested in doing the virtual, only a few, and each time it's audio only. There's no visual. They're not interested in the visual side. So I'll just kind of mention that to give
I
you
appreciate that. I'll noodle that around a little bit because we've seen that shift with customers in terms of how they want to engage, what methods they engage in, and then what's your most effective way to be able to build that relationship when you don't have the nonverbals, you don't have the face-to-face contact.
Right.
And emails only build relationships so far.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks for that add in. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else want to build on that, expand on that, add a different example in?
I'll go and add one in.
Thank you.
Talking about just virtual and how this all worked in. We, as a company, did our first virtual tour for a customer.
Yes.
We basically took a Zoom and did like a Zoom meeting with the customer. So
New territory. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely new for us and weird from the standpoint of new, but then how do you do it? How do you walk somebody around a facility and show them stuff with your camera and still talk to everybody and still get the message across? And so yeah, it's different.
Good. Oh, I'm glad to know that because, you tried something and you probably learned some things from it, but it is, I think there is an interesting, I don't know, meet me back in a year, I'll buy breakfast, but I think there's an interesting piece that how we come through this and what sticks. And there's a lot of discussion happening in the circles I run with that this stays hybrid, that we now have a new expectation of how we engage, that we need a mixed model, both of face-to-face and that virtual is here to stay. So I'm intrigued by that. Thank you for that comment. Anyone else?
This is Julie Thomas. I feel it's been great for professional development across the nation that groups are getting together and sharing best practices and things like that. That's been wonderful to be able to talk live with those people. Here locally, I work with the Creative Retirement Program, and I have tried to inch them into at least a conference phone call, and then we tried the Zoom. That age group is not a big fan of Zoom. They want to be in person, and so we need to respect that.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, Julie, and the work you're doing with that. I have another group that that was my initial impression as well. It's been interesting is that the group, to continue that group's work, they really had to push through that learning curve on Zoom and get used to it. And I'm chuckling a little bit to myself because it's been fun to watch that pattern. But every group's going to be different in terms of how much effort they want to put into that. And so just even having some of those conversations of it has shifted. And if we can't do the face-to-face, it's still important for whatever our purposes or our work is and how we keep figuring out ways to do that. Yeah. Anyone have the experience through this that your work fundamentally shifted? What you were doing just doesn't fit or feel like what the work you're doing now? Anyone have any of that experience this year?
I would, I'm Theron Schutte, superintendent here in Marshalltown of the
Hi,
public
Theron.
schools.
Yes.
It's been quite different for me with no travel. Typically, I'm engaged in a lot of meetings at the state or even federal level. And of course, that's all gone, everything's gone digital. So I have a lot more time because I don't have the travel time vested, which has been great because I can get more done during the day. And I, quite honestly, I've been sharing with my national organization for years that they've got to figure out a way to make their professional learning more accessible through use of the internet anyway, because participation has dropped over time just because of the cost, because the meetings are always in San Francisco or, you know, San Diego or whatever. And so it's to attend those things that used to be pretty common has become somewhat cost prohibitive for public schools. And so, you know, I think on the back end of this, there'll be a lot more interest and desire for people to learn and grow through virtual conferences. And you know, they've been forced to be able to figure out how to do it and to do it well pretty quickly. So I think the other significant change for us as a school district is that, you know, we have a lot of meetings, you know, administrative meetings of different shapes and sizes. And historically, it always required people to come together somewhere, which again involves travel. It involves leaving your school building if you're a building principal, which is just in and of itself a little bit unnerving if they're the only administrator in the building and something happens. And so I really believe on the back end of this that we will continue to do as many of our meetings virtually, even post-COVID as we can, just to keep people in their buildings and to provide quick access in the case of an emergency or a need. And it really is not a big issue if someone has to mute themselves to address something, you know, and the meeting can just continue on versus someone up and leaving a meeting and that sort of thing. So
super examples. Thank you for sharing that. And as you know, I think about a couple of things, especially with certainly in your role and a great example within our schools, that while the goal may have always still been, right, pre-COVID, to keep kids safe and to provide them the best educational experience and to help prepare them for their future, it's a great example of how the work itself has shifted, right? Goals are still the same, but the work you're actually having to do that has shifted. And I think for a lot of us, especially in leadership roles, what I was doing isn't what I'm doing now, and that feels different. To your point, though, we've gained some advantages in that. There was somewhere in the middle of April where I went, I'm never leaving my desk again. You know, as somebody who travels 20 hours a week, and went, this is different. And yet had to shift to figure out, wait a minute, how do I do this work differently? And how do I reach out to the companies I work with, and what's that look like? And so as we think about time and a hybrid model, and the fact that many of these aspects are here long term, it then brings us back to what conversations do we need to be having with our teams right now about what's working for us and what's not working for us. So I love to encourage some check-ins to say, okay, so as we go into fourth quarter, right? However your terms work, and we have a lot of different kinds of organizations represented today, but if you're just coming through harvest, and that's a big push for you in the fall because of the way your sector connects to agriculture, or if you are coming in and fourth quarter is your busy time, and coming into late fall, early winter, and you know your team is going to be pushed in some ways that maybe third quarter over the summer they're just not. I love there's an approach called a trigger transition, that when something shifts, right, for us as leaders, it's a great opportunity for us to go, whoa, hey, what's working well, what's not working well, and use that moment to shift the momentum as a conversation point or as a check-in, to learn from that and really then be very strategic and deliberate about what comes next. And that's my hope with pre and post COVID of this year. Communication was a challenge prior to COVID. I'm convinced we've been talking about communication challenges since the beginning of humans. I don't think that's a new topic. What I do find really interesting is how has the conversation shifted? So to the point about hybrid, and it had been cost prohibitive, and now we have some new options. Or as a customer, I don't have to travel to see Metal Tech, but wow, you figured out a way to move me around on your computer, and so I can see firsthand what's going on, and you've engaged me in a different way, and so now I'm going to move faster than waiting out the travel piece. And that's probably the biggest shift that I've seen in my work with companies going into this fall, is that, you know, when things changed significantly in the middle of March, many of us were thinking, hey, if you just told me I had to get through this till August 1, we're good. I'll get to this and through this, and we'll move forward on August 1, but we had no end date. And what I'm seeing now pop back up as we go into fall is people have said, okay, we've been at this a while, and what do we need to do just to be able to move through this? And so what's this new way of working look, knowing that it could shift again? I actually said to a group, to Theron's comment, I was with a group of manufacturing supervisors in the beginning of February, and I asked two questions as part of the strategic thinking course. One was, and I said, by a show of hands, I seriously said this, by a show of hands, because we're all in the room together, how many of you have had supply chain disruption due to the virus in China? I literally said that out loud. And, right? So half of them had already at that point, end of January, beginning of February, had supply chain disruption because of the virus in China, which sounds now ridiculous for me to say. But I also asked the group a different question. I said, if your team found out tomorrow, we were doing some scenario planning to work on some strategic thinking. If your team couldn't travel tomorrow, how would you handle that disruption? And I literally had key managers and companies look back at me and go, well, that would never happen. So we've certainly learned that things can shift pretty fast, that the work we were doing isn't the work that may continue to happen. And yet I really want you to go back to that tried and true best practice. Who's doing what? I think as leaders, it's really pushing us to have some better conversations about clarifying roles and responsibilities of what do we need and expect from each other, and how are we going to communicate that out. And I'll share with you, we're going to connect this to a second piece and a tool that I'm seeing happen and encouraging more and more of. And so our point number 2, if we connect that, is this cadence of communication. What is the pattern of communication in your team, your company? And so some of the best practices, if you look up and think about some of the best practices right now for virtual teams, we're seeing more of a need for daily digital check-ins. So that's just being able to reach out to someone else and say, hey, Steve, how you doing? What do you need? How, you know, and it doesn't even have to be business focused, because when we move teams separate, we lost some of the chit chat, relationship building, how was your weekend moments. And I've heard everything from companies in teams where team members just literally log on to a common room from 8 to 8:30 in the morning and just work simultaneously together and chit chat a little bit and talk about somebody's cat that walks across the computer or the dog that's in the background, but just for a little bit more of that relationship building time. Again, different teams have different scenarios, but if we look at the way that maps out, daily check-ins, weekly one-on-ones, weekly or bi-weekly team meetings, monthly big picture reviews. This has been a year that's made me chuckle a little bit on the fact that, 10 years ago, right, we were writing 10-year strategic plans. And now we're like, 10 years? Well, up until this year, I was writing 3-year strategic plans with a 1-year roll. And this year we see this, I don't even know what's going to happen in the next month, but we still have to know what we can shift in order to move plans. And so if you just look at those 4 bullets, if we think about best practices as leaders, I've got to be able to name my direct reports, who needs to hear from me. And not every environment has the daily check-in. It may not be co-working together. It may just be sending you an email. It may be scheduling a phone call for 15 minutes. How are things going? What do you need from me? And doing more of a person check-in. The weekly one-on-ones, and for some of us, it's a monthly one-on-one, is much more business. Could be business oriented or could be coaching and development oriented, where we're checking in one-on-one with our team member about their own development path. What are they working on? How can I support them? What are their goals? Or we're checking on business projects kind of content. Certainly team meetings have become that much more critical to make sure we're aligned. So doing that in a good, meaningful way. There's some great resources out there. And as we go through this morning, as I share things, if there's anything that I mention or anything you're looking for, I'll make sure you have my email again. Nisa can find me. You can Google Selena and Waverly, and chances are you'll find me. You can find me on LinkedIn. But if you're looking for a resource, there's some really good virtual meeting best practices material coming out. There's things that we've got that I can easily share with you. But the reason I mention this cadence of communication is if you really look at a lot of the experts right now in this unique time of communication, the argument is more but more effective. So really mapping it out. And one of the things that I've been able to do with a number of groups in these last month is what I call internal communication mapping. How often do we meet? Who runs the meeting? What's the purpose of the meeting? How often does the meeting happen? And in your handouts, there was just a very, very simple spreadsheet that had those topics listed across. And it can be a really good visual exercise to have a group map out. How often do we email? How often do we text each other? How often do we meet? What kinds of meetings do we have? For leaders and companies, it may be broader yet. It may be I do a town hall with my entire company once a month or once a quarter. The regional leader does it one step removed from that. So if I do quarterly, they do monthly. The focus of my communication is this. The focus of their communication is that. And one of the activities I've enjoyed earlier this year is literally sitting with a team of leaders at a company and mapping it all out. I want to know every single meeting you have. I want to know who's in it. I want to know what's the purpose. What are you supposed to be getting out of this? Because I think it's also created an opportunity for us to really take a close look at our meetings. Some companies are reporting right now that they're meeting less because it changed, and so their communication patterns changed and they found other ways to get it done. Other companies are meeting more because, again, things shifted and they feel the need to come together more often. There's no right answer. What I want is a good, hard conversation about what is the pattern that makes sense for your team. In March and April, we got used to almost hourly updates, right? If you really look to March and early April, it felt like things were changing so quickly that we needed hourly or multiple updates a day. Now that we've moved forward a little bit, right? What does that look like in and in the rhythm to that. So if employees had gotten used to multiple daily updates, maybe now it's daily updates. Now maybe we've moved to weekly updates. Now maybe we've moved to monthly updates. And is there a miss there? So think about what that might mean for you this morning. What could you do to take a little bit of time to map that out for your team or your organization? So we have 2 points here for this first hour: roles, responsibilities, and expectations, and the cadence of communication. Let me pause there for a minute. Comments or questions from anyone? I'm going to stop the share here. I'm going to bring it back to here. I'm going to double check chat room, just make sure I didn't miss anything else there. Good statements there on some of those challenges. Here's what I'd like to do. We're going to continue to shake this up different ways this morning. I'm going to, for about 10 minutes before we take a stretch break. So we're going to take a stretch break. We've learned some things in Zoom time. That is, frequent breaks are a good thing. Because it takes a different level of focus and energy to maintain this. So I want to do an activity before we take that stretch break. And what I'm going to ask you to do, it doesn't matter whether you have your camera on or camera off, you'll be able to participate as long as you've got sound. I'm going to move us into some small group breakout rooms for just a few minutes. Whoever lands in that room with you, I want you to say, "Hi, my name is Judy," or "Hi, my name is Christy," and introduce yourself. And I want you to look at those first 2 points: roles, responsibilities, and expectations, or cadence of communication. What rings most true for you so far? Is it that maybe the work has shifted and you need to go back and really revisit who's doing what? Or is it a pattern of communication that maybe has shifted, that maybe putting some clarity around meetings or leading better meetings, or how often we're meeting, whether that's one-on-one or with a group, might be an area that you want to work on? So out of those first 2 key points, something that resonates with you. But this is also an opportunity to connect and just to share a little bit of whatever you're comfortable sharing with folks in your room about how things are going and what is most important for you to work on this morning. So we will do that in less than 10 minutes. So this is a brief conversation. Say, "Hi, my name is, here's something that stands out to me. What do you think?" Toss that around your breakout room. For those of you who've not done breakout rooms before, as soon as I click a magic button on my side, you are going to all magically end up in a black hole together, and you're going to go to breakout rooms. And when you get to that breakout room, you'll see some other people come through the black hole with you, and names will appear on your screen. And that'll give you a chance to give everyone a minute just to settle in and then have a conversation. Someone kick in and start the lead on that. There's about 4 people to a room. And if for some reason you see a name show up and they're not speaking, they may have had to step aside. Don't worry about it. Just continue without them, and they'll jump back in when they can. All right? We'll take a few minutes to do that. You'll get a 60-second warning before I bring you back. And we'll see what came up in that conversation. And then we'll take a stretch break. All right? Questions for me before I hit that button? You may see me, this is where I have like some weird godlike power. I get to jump in the rooms and listen in a little bit and say hi. So if you see me appear, that's what I'm doing. I love listening in and just encouraging where I can. All right, here we go. It will be showing up on your screen momentarily. You can accept that, and I'll see you back in about 8 minutes.
To try to get into, typically we try to get into the business to talk with people one-on-one, face-to-face. And so that's been a challenge. And as you mentioned, Selena, you know, you can only get so far in an email, right? You got to see the whites of their eyes, or so that's been kind of another challenge. I mean, we're working through those. That's why we thought something like this would be a great way to introduce to business and industry on how we can reach out to one another and have those conversations.
And they start reappearing. Here they are. It's the trainer's fear when they don't start reappearing, but it's always nice to see them start coming back in and names reappearing. And no matter how hard I try not to, I always cut somebody off. So that's just a few more folks, few more groups coming back here. There we go. Good, good, good. I loved the conversation. So as we reconnect here, right? Just that ability to say, it's not just me. This is hard stuff. And I appreciated the conversations I heard. I didn't get to every group, but just to have you be able to share that, connect person to person, because that's really what we're talking about today. This leading and engaging teams virtually is still about the relationship. And what we need to understand is we're building relationships differently these days. 2 places to start: be really clear on roles, responsibilities, and expectations. Number 2, check on the communication pattern. How often do we need to connect? Maybe we need to connect now more or less than we did before, and how that shifted. And so really just paying attention to those 2 pieces already can start building and strengthening, or just giving us some increased or new perspective of how we're working in our teams. Did anyone hear anything out of that you want to give a shout out, or you thought was just pretty cool, or a comment that just resonated with you from the groups?
Tracy from the Iowa Veterans Home had mentioned that her staff kind of went through a grieving process, and you know, just that the way that they operated before is probably gone, and probably gone forever in many cases. So I never thought of it that way, as a grieving process, but it's so true when you look at it. Those large meetings and some of the things that we took for granted are probably gone.
I love that you gave the shout out to that. And Tracy, thank you for sharing that. Tell you what, I think it's time for a break. Sorry about that. Let's do this. Let's take 10. I'll come back to that point when we come back. Thank you all. Start bringing it back together here. As folks are coming back in, so I'm not muted. That's the timer from back when we're in. Let's see. Technology gremlins. Nothing should have changed in a 10-minute break. Nothing yet.
Can anybody else hear her?
I can't hear her.
No, nothing.
I can just barely hear
We're gonna
her.
go back to this. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So the headphones decided to start working again. We'll try this again. It has been a morning of technology gremlins. I'm glad I'm among friends because those of you who've been around, this is not my normal. So thank you. All right. So I want to go with a comment that had just been highlighted that I think we've got some flexibility here with the content this morning. I want to just add in here in a different way as we move on. And to the comment that Tracy, I think that was a really insightful comment that you shared with your group about those waves, right? And what we're seeing now in terms of those ups and the downs as the changes happen. And I want to share with you this model that has been something I've been using all year long to describe this. And it's a modified version of the Kubler and Ross model that many of us know from our own private lives as we experience a grief process. But if we think about this with change at work, it was the example that was just brought up of we've got some loss of things that have shifted that we may not be able to get to do again and that we really liked those. And if I apply this to work, and there's some big stuff that happens, right? There's big loss in life, even at work, we have some significant things. And while those are important, that's not what I want to focus on just as I add this resource or visual in for you today. This is more of the day-to-day stuff that happens that you can go through the grieving process three times in 20 minutes when you open up your emails for the morning, right? You know what that sounds like? What? Who thought this idea up? Nope. Ugh, fine. What do we need to do? Click second email. And so to what Tracy just brought up is what we're seeing from a virtual connection leadership process is that people are cycling through this in very different ways. So shock and denial is that first response of what? How are we going to get that done? What does the customer need? How are we going to make that happen too? Right? Then typically paired, if we go into the U shape down that left side of emotion, of some sort of emotion that gets tied to that. What I see happen in our organizations is that all of us can probably think of a coworker we've known somewhere in our career who went shock denial, hit some sort of emotion, and they hit anger and stayed angry for like 15 years, right? That they got stuck there and they didn't move on. Bargaining is that unofficial negotiation of the terms of our agreement. And so right now, what I've seen that as is fine. If they're going to expect that of me, I am not staying 1 minute past 5 o'clock. So when something changes in our work and we're grieving that process, the shock, denial, emotions, some sort of adjustment, some sort of, well, I missed that, I liked that, I want to do this instead. If we don't get stuck at any of those, what we're looking for is that upward turn. And what I love about our Iowa companies is the phrase that I often hear that signifies upward turn sounds something like this. Fine, what do we need to do? So it was a deep sigh, right? And I'm not holding us back, but I'm not completely engaged to some sort of progress and acceptance. And what I want us thinking about, even as we think about leading and engaging virtual teams, and I'm so glad you highlighted that from your group conversation, is that we're constantly going through this cycle. And anybody who's experienced significant grief in your life know that you don't just arrive at a stage and are miraculously, aha, you're better, you're moving forward. No, it's up 2, back 3. And so there's a real momentum shift that happens with teams. And within our teams as leaders, I want us paying attention to that momentum. If you've got 5 people on your team, you've got 5 different people at different stages of this process. If you have 200 people on your team, you got people at all different stages of this. And I think as leaders, if our responsibility is to meet people where they're at and bring them with us, we have to recognize at what point of this are they at this year. And maybe there is a part of their work they're missing. Maybe there was something we used to get to do that we just don't get to now. And we see that process happening. And there is absolutely a grieving process to it. I really liked that about my work, and now it's not there. And now I have to do this, but it's not my favorite thing to do. And as leaders, it's so important that we pay attention. And that's why the check-ins are important. That's why the relationship building remains key, because of those changes. Anyone want to add in or comment on that, where you see that happening or apply for you? Does it make sense? Maybe for some of the ups and the downs you've seen in coworkers, doesn't even have to be members. If you don't have direct reports, maybe it's customers you're serving and their own uncertainties and ups and downs. Maybe it's with your team members. But at least noting for today, because if we really understand that as roles shift, as expectations shift, or as communication patterns change, we're going to view it differently on different days. So I just wanted to be able to add, maybe, hopefully if that visual is helpful for you, just to add some comment in. Anybody else?
It's helpful for me to see that, because I never really thought about that. But, you know, obviously, yeah, I think we all have that. In the email communication, it takes longer. You know, in a direct conversation, you know, if there's the shock and denial and the emotion and all the negative down stuff, you get through that. And if you can, you know, if you stay in that verbal communication long enough, you get past it and you get to the upswing.
Okay. Which, to your point, I love the point about time. Some of this stuff just takes longer. So we might have gotten some time back in other parts of our job. Theron said earlier, right? Not as much travel. So that may have shifted for many of us. But now the work is different, because I've got other stuff just takes me longer now to work through. And so that feels different. Yeah, good. Well, let's add in our focus for the next pair, if you will, is points number 3 and 4 as we look at best practices here. So I'm gonna put this back up just for something for us to cue into. And so number 3, let's look at some of the things that are happening right now with prioritization. Prioritize, eliminate the unnecessary, and create some stop doing lists. Jim Collins, in his book Good to Great, is the one who originally popularized the idea of a stop doing list. And the idea is, when priorities shift, we have to continue to have conversations about what comes first. So we can certainly balance that difference between efficiency and effectiveness. But I still propose that as leaders leading virtual teams, when the work has shifted and the priorities have shifted, we have to have some ongoing conversations. Now, many of you have known that in terms of protocols, safety, employee, patient, student care, your priorities shifted. And when we think about engaging people, so engagement is all about emotional connection, so that in the workplace, if you think about it that way, people perform better. We were seeing more fatigue prior to 2020, and I'm really concerned about leader fatigue now and what that looks like in these coming months. And so it's a great opportunity, if we're going to open up some conversations about roles and responsibilities, and based on what your organization has to focus on right now, what's the best use of its time? Because even if the time is shifted, we still only have 24 hours in the day, no matter how hard we try to pack in more. And I know you really don't want to be working all of those hours. So consider that priority. How do we make decisions in our team about priorities? So if I don't have some of the same visual cues, and we've got stuff that, you know, I look at the phrase that many of us have used of, I got too much on my plate right now. Anytime I've heard that from any of my team members over the years, I know we have a prioritization issue. So that's when I need to jump in and say, tell me what's on your plate. Help me understand what you're working on now. Let's look at the new request or the new need or the shift that needs to happen, and let's make some decisions together about what comes first. So that really becomes a conversation about alignment. How will we do the right things effectively? How are we going to do the right things in the right order? So that's sequencing. What we do and what we ask people to do affects the relationship. So one of the areas that I'm intrigued by is that we've had in modern business history the organizational chart. And the organizational chart, I can put that chart up anywhere in the world in front of any modern business, and they're going to know what that chart is. And originally it gave us structure and hierarchy and division of work and who reports to who. One of the interesting things that I find with it is it doesn't give us communication flow. It doesn't tell us that this person has to talk to 3 people over here, or this senior leader needs to talk to these 10 people over here. It doesn't give us flow, and it doesn't give us relationships. So even thinking about, you can't decide to stop doing something without understanding the ripple effect in your organization. So as leaders, right, in an organizational system, when you pull on one part of the system, other parts of the system feel it. And you can't make a decision without it affecting someone else in some way. And so how do those relationships now get cared for? So we've talked about that in the context of roles and expectations. We've talked about that in the context of staying connected through communication. And we can also now talk about relationships in the context of priority. What might be urgent for me isn't urgent for you, but it still might both need to get done. So we're seeing an emphasis that in building better virtual teams in this changing environment, we have to be even clearer, ultra clear on what are the priorities. What are the priorities for today? What are priorities for the week? What are the priorities for the month, the quarter, however you break that down. And then really still having some conversations about how those priorities reveal our values. How do we make decisions alone or in a group about action items as we decide what those priorities are? Because I can send an email out and it's really fast and really efficient, but it may not be effective. So we're really looking at ways to think about eliminating the stuff you just don't have to do right now. And that was advice given at the beginning of the pandemic of conserving that energy, really paying attention to what you need to focus on. And I see that for the long haul now. And we're starting to see it pop up in a lot of the mental wellness and mental health conversations, that when we go past 6 months, it's a different kind of coping strategies. And so what are the things we just don't make sense for us to keep doing right now because things have shifted? Or the stop doing list, and the stop doing list being a conversation amongst departments or teams that these are the kinds of issues or services or things that we used to do that just don't make sense right now. Now, again, I can go back to that grieving process, and you could decide something doesn't need to be done right now, and now you just ticked off 3 people because they really liked that, or they really wanted to be able to do that, or it was their favorite thing to do, and now you're starting the grieving process for them. So it is good to have some healthy conversation around it, just recognizing that if we've got 20 people on this team between multiple buildings or multiple locations, what is the best use of our effort right now, and being very intentional, very strategic about what's those priorities. It was easier to have those conversations when we're face-to-face, not in masks on site. Now we've got to be able to have those conversations in clearer, more direct ways, because we're not picking up on a lot of those nonverbal cues. We're not picking up on those same visuals in our organization that say this is priority or this is not. We know that things have changed. And some of you have heard me say this stat. It's still one of my favorites, and I'll include it in this section. And I find it to be very true as we watch teams shift right now. And that is, for every 60 seconds of planning, I save myself 3 minutes of chasing it down later. 1 minute for 3, and there are days I know each of you need a net gain of 2. And what's that sound like? What's that look like? 60 seconds before I jump on the Zoom call, 60 seconds before I walk over to this meeting, 60 seconds before I send this email. Who's in this meeting? What do I need to know? What do I need to offer? Saves me 3 minutes of shoot, forgot to ask this, and now 2 emails, 3 text messages, and a phone call later, I have my answer. Before I send this email, who's in the to line? Is the subject matter clear? Do I sound grouchy in my email, and is the attachment there? 60 seconds of planning before I send it, a pause, saves me 3 minutes of shoot, forgot to send the attachment, and now 3 people think I'm crabby today. That's gonna cost me more time later. So when we really think about priorities today, I want you to consider within your team of teams how information flows about what the priorities are. Are you communicating that out as a leader? Are you having team meetings about it? What is it that has shifted and what maybe is your top priority, your second priority, your third priority? Does that look different in September than it did June, than it did February? As you look ahead, what's going to shift differently in November, December, and January? And how will you continue to talk about shifting priorities with your team? Comments or questions on that? The tool that was sent out in your handouts with that, and again, if you're missing it, Nisa will help us and I'm happy to send it out to you. There's a favorite tool of mine called the Start, Stop, Continue exercise. And it can be done as simple or as complex as you want to make it. It can be done face-to-face or virtually, however you want to do it. It's a great way to start some conversation. So as a leader, if I need to check in with my team, maybe it's been a while, maybe I want to just engage, you can always blame it on me. And I was in this class and your instructor gave us homework. You can always say that, but it's a way to engage in some conversation, whether it's in a team meeting or one-on-one, to say, you know what, I would love to take a half hour with you. I want to set up a time sometime in the next couple of weeks, and I want you to give these questions some thought. Now, I have people who do that face-to-face and direct or virtually do that. I have some folks who send it out to their entire team and ask them for some written feedback. So there's no bad way to do that. It really just depends on your team and the way you do that process. But the Start, Stop, Continue is an exercise of questions to be able to say, what are some things we should start doing on this team? Are there some things we're not getting to right now that we should start doing? Are there some things we need to stop doing? So going with that stop doing list. And on that tool, you've got some questions to help guide that. And then what do we need to continue to do? And so that's a great way to align priorities right now, to say, oh, that's really important. And that's something we need to keep putting some energy to. So, and it's an alignment tool to help you develop some conversations with your team to consider what's working well for us right now, what's not working, and how do we proceed in conversation to know what's priority as a result. So that was sent with the packet. It's a simple exercise, but it can be a really powerful one when you use it in a way to engage that conversation, to get people thinking about what's the best use of our energy right now. I was on the phone with a company owner not too long ago, president of this company. It's a 3rd generation company, cares deeply about his people, trying to do this the right way, trying to take good care of them. And, you know, for all of his experience and all of his know-how in the industry, he said to me, he goes, Selena, I want to be a better leader for my team, but there are just so many things pounding on me right now. I can't grow the business because I can't get people in. Everything we've had to do has shifted because of 2020. And I can't even figure out what I have to get done today, right? And I'm hearing that more and more from folks, of leaders who just feel so stretched, and again, some fog or fatigue, and ways we work through that to get that clarity back, to be laser-like, focused leaders that our teams need us to be. Because while the work itself has shifted, our team needs us even more. And so to make sure that, you know, part of this planning process, part of the prioritization process is leader care as well. What you're doing for you to make sure you've got the energy to run the course. And that becomes also really important on a personal level. So let me take a pause there. Let's add that in here. I'm gonna put up a an opportunity here. So what are some things that you're doing as leaders to prioritize you? No matter what role you have, no matter what your title is today, what are some things you're finding you have to do for you better to stay on track, to stay healthy, to stay focused on priorities? I'd love to hear some of the strategies. What are you doing? Anyone have something you want to start us off with? I'm going to give you just my time management one to start off with. So I'm looking at top priorities every morning. I list them out the night before. So I've always made it a practice, and it's become really important this year, that at the end of my day, I list out what's top on the mind for tomorrow, because in that moment, it's a recency effect. It's in my mind. I've lived it all day long. It's much clearer at the end of my day than the next morning, even if I've checked emails 10 times before, between then and there. But the next morning, it's much harder for me to generate it because more things have hit my inbox, more things my team has told me. So I've really been holding myself to the practice that I'm going to list them at the end of the day. So at least I've captured those. Even if they switch by morning, I now can reprioritize what that list looks like. And I've also, here's the offset of that, of why I've committed to that, is that self-care piece is you also need a break. And I've made the commitment that if I write it down at whatever time my day ends, whether that's 5 o'clock or 8 o'clock or whatever time that is at, I've written it down, I need to let it go so that I can focus on sleep or some downtime or hanging out with people in my household. I need to set it aside because it'll be there tomorrow morning, and really make sure that I step aside from it. Of course, unexpected or emergencies can come up, but in general, I need to be able to step away from it, to be able to rest and regenerate, to take it back on tomorrow. What else would you add? What are you doing for you?
I'll go ahead and add to that one, Selena. It's really the same thing though, but if I don't write it down at the end of the day, you know, I can spend all night thinking about it.
Yeah.
And really ruin the next day. You know, not, you know, just getting rid of the, okay, work is at work, and try to go home and not think about it. But at least I have that list. And then how many times do we wake up at 2 a.m. and maybe it's been solved, or maybe it's some idea came up and, oh yeah, now I can do it this way and everything will be all right.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Anyone else? Thanks, Jason.
I guess I try to just be complete. You know, if I like the idea about thinking about an email. Does it say the right thing? Does it, you know, how does it portray my feelings? And is it complete with everything? I think I'm trying to make a conscious effort to do that as a work from home person, you know, so I don't have to have 10 emails about the same thing or follow it up with 3 phone calls, you know, to try to be complete with what I'm doing. I make an effort for that.
Nice. Thank you. Anyone else? Couple of good reminders there. Even if you're not able to unmute right now, feel free to put it in the chat box. I'd love to be able to pick up on a few more of those. And part of the reason for today, if we really think about leading and engaging teams and the new challenges that it takes to do that virtually, it takes energy. And if we're feeling drained, if we're not feeling like we've got the focus as leaders, it starts with us, but it's not about us. We've got to find some ways to increase that self-care, to really address some of the fatigue issues that are happening, and really understand what our priorities are. And I've got another leader that I'm coaching right now that, you know, he and I do very well in the fact that we have squirrel brains together. Our brains can go a mile a minute in lots of different directions really fast. And that we're really needing to make sure that we rein that in and we focus and identify what has to be done today. And it's so easy right now just to be pulled away by so many things that I do believe there's some opportunity for us as leaders to be that much more clear and really work at modeling that and leading that for our teams. Good, let's build on that. And some of you are gonna recognize this. I am going to work with it in a very different way today, but it's something that we're seeing within teams, especially working virtually, is what's our process? Now, I am not, we've got other people on the call today who are our quality gurus. But I've been doing some interesting work around virtual teams and how we share information, how we understand what the process is and where we lose time. And in an event like we've had this year where time becomes really, really precious because of shifting work and changing priorities, as we've discussed, it's been a fantastic opportunity. Use this as a trigger transition to say, hey, you know, this process never really worked as well for us. And now we're seeing some new issues because we're more geographically dispersed, or again, we don't get the visual cues, or we're face masked, or we're socially distant, or the process itself has changed. So thinking about how we approach process improvement at this point is a really good way to clarify. So I made the comment earlier about roles and responsibilities. When roles and responsibilities are not clear, it leads to more miscommunication. More miscommunication leads to more distrust or mistrust. And roles and responsibilities get closely connected into process. This may be an opportunity for you within your teams to say, hey, because of what's going on with this customer, this project, this process, the way we have to work a little differently right now, let's take some time out to really fix this process. Maybe we need to redesign it given the challenges on your team right now. But here's our 1 minute for 3 example. A little bit more time to examine the process, the steps, the work instructions, the job aids, who is on that email distribution list, where those files are located, any of those things. A little bit more time invested in that can help save us some time later. And when we're engaging teams virtually, people have to be clear. So this goes back to the very, very basic tenet that most people want to do good work. Very few people show up every day going, yes, how can I mess this up today? Very few people. That's a different class. But most of us, right, are trying to do the best we can with what we've got given our set of circumstances. So taking some time to improve the process. And you know many of these things. Some of you live these as part of your professional role, but think about where mistakes, defects, errors are showing up. It may be that when your team is now more virtual, errors are showing up in different places. Paying attention to that. Really look for some of those patterns where we're just not landing what we need to land for the customer, that we're not quite, whether it's a, and again, it could be in a service with patient care, it could be education with taking good care of staff and teachers and students, but what is the pattern that is showing up where our misses are, where we just not quite landing it correctly? And so you can count that as part of defects or part of mistakes and errors. Is it in people being overwhelmed? Is it in people not knowing? I can keep some sort of tally sheet, if you will. If we've had the same issue pop up from parents or clients or customers over the last couple of weeks, then I need to pay attention to why is that pattern popping up. Overproduction. This is a great time to know when we just spend too much time on something that doesn't have value to our customer. We also need to know the opposite of that, right? Over communication, all the things we've been doing to keep people more informed right now may be necessary. We may need some overproduction in some areas because customers are expecting it. This is some of the, certainly the PR and responsibility in updating clientele or updating community about what we're doing, COVID response, etc. But think about other things. This is more to the priority alignment that maybe we're just doing and it needs to be on our stop doing or wait a while list. Inventory can be just things that are sitting around that are just getting in the way, where it's now taking more energy to work around something, step aside from something. And I don't mean just physically. This can be in systems. This can be in keystrokes to get to certain areas on computer systems. Inventory has an interesting piece of what do we have around that maybe we just don't need right now. Don't necessarily think about in just physical inventory. Extra processing related to overproduction, right? Over inspecting, rework, extra handling. We may have some redundancies and processes right now because that's what the situation calls for. Keep an eye open for where we've got extra processing time. And the reason we bring some of these up is I'm watching virtual teams versus co-located teams. If it's out of sight, out of mind, how do we know we're not doing it? How do we know what's on the radar screen of, are we exercising this? Are we getting it right? Are we missing it? Who's got it? Are we spending more time on it? So Jason spends time on it, Julie spends time on it, and then it comes to me and it's just not needed. Look for some of that extra handling. We may need to do a little of that, but where could we be more aware of it to improve the process so that we get some time back? Oh, we've seen unnecessary motion in so many ways right now because we've had to do some extra things. So again, the wash hands, right? But just where things are placed. And in a pre-COVID world, one of my favorite examples came out of IT when we all went to centralized printers for efficiency on cost savings to print to a bigger, faster networked printer. Well, we gained some things in network printers in a centrally located space, but we lost some efficiency in walk time, in batch time, and how long it goes to take me, how many people I have to pass by who may now start a conversation with me. Consider some processes right now for you as you're looking at your team virtually that just create some unneeded extra emails or unnecessary shared, is it that you need to clean up the shared document space because we're having to click too far and people don't know where the folders are, and we really need to take some time with our SharePoint space to clean it up a little bit, investing the time to improve the process. Unnecessary transport. So in a traditional continuous improvement environment, we would look at putting parts next to processes so they're right there, close to production. What does that look like for you in your office? I'll give you some examples. I had sales teams who got moved home pretty darn quickly, but all their visual cues were up on their bulletin board in their office. Pricing, shipping zones, all those visual cues that they had in their cubicle or their workspace, they didn't think about as they packed up their computer and got their stuff home. All of a sudden their visual space was different. And so now they needed some of those things to refer to on their computer, or if their technology wasn't ideal when they got home to work on it, then they had to backpedal a little bit and go, wait a minute, I counted on that shipping zones map in front of me and now I don't have it. So consider what that might mean for you. Maybe that is things that you refer to on a regular basis, forms, it could be electronic or paper, things you use on a regular basis, having those well stocked so it doesn't take you more energy to have to go find them. What does that mean for you as a leader with virtual teams? Does your team know where to find stuff? If somebody moved offsite or they moved onsite, there's actually, I'm starting to look at some of the issues of when people start reintegrating, it creates a whole new set of stuff. Now we got to figure out how to work back together again. And what's that look like? And how do we move information or materials, or just even in a COVID world, prevent cross-contamination and what that looks like? We see a shift in waiting and downtime now, waiting for things, waiting for emails, waiting for updates. It may be as a team or from a coaching process, I need to be clear with my team on what's this look like. If you're waiting on something, that's lost production time, that's lost performance time. If I'm waiting to go see those 3 residents and I'm working my order of my assignment today, then what can I do meanwhile? So that may be my shift nurse is really clear. When you're waiting, these are our top 3 priorities for tonight. These are the things we have to get done. These are the things you can do in between seeing residents. What does that look like? And we know that we have some employees who will go fill in the gaps because they know what to do and they're motivated enough to do it. We have to be especially clear about that right now, so that any type of waiting or downtime, sometimes we need the rest. I'm not saying that, break time. But when we have a gap in process, in performance, in services provided, what do we do with that? Now, some don't have enough wait time right now and always are feeling that pressure, and that's a different, but if we look at time to improve the process, where could we eliminate some of that waiting or downtime? Confusion of personnel has been one of those classics we've talked about a long time in identifying waste and processes. Think about what that looks like now for your team. It goes back to our communication piece. When people are confused, again, unclear roles and responsibilities, it's lost performance. What do I need to do as a leader? So now maybe I set up, maybe something that worked for you June, July, August, and September needs to shift for October, November, December, that you send a weekly update, that you outline priorities for the week for the team, that you have them maybe identify some things for you so that you know what their priorities are. How do we get people clear on that? And as a leader, I want you building capacity in other people. I don't want you taking the lead on all of this. I want some of your team to be communicating with you. And so how can you eliminate and be really clear about who's producing what information? Last one, untapped employee potential. So if we look at improving the processes, who has what expertise on our team? Where is our talent being underutilized right now because maybe the process shifted, the work has shifted? Who is just not that engaged right now? They might be bored. They might not be feeling connected. They might have started withdrawing. We're seeing some of that in virtual teams. How can you as a leader pay attention to that a little bit more closely? So those first 4, by the way, as you note, took a chunk of time this morning. But many of those best practices that we engage in when things were before 2020 are some of the ways we now look at how do we do this in dispersed teams. When processes have shifted, maybe priorities have shifted, maybe locations have shifted. Comments or questions on anything between 3 and 4? Any examples or comments you want to make back to me? I'll add in Big 5 virtual team roadblocks. What we see popping up in the research right now, lack of face-to-face communication. You've mentioned that. Lack of social interaction. We've talked about that this morning. Team style clashes. This is where it can be especially helpful if you've done DISC assessments or strengths finders or any of other key tools like that, where people just need to remember, that's your strength, not mine, or you're a command style and I'm not, and I've gotten my 5th email from you this morning. It's just a great time to bring some of those tools back up, because we have different styles and those styles look different under pressure, under moderate stress and under extreme stress. And I would also push that a little bit further. They look different when we're fatigued. Maybe it's time to revisit just some team tools like that so that we understand that people have different strengths. Everybody's got their own style. And if we can commit to values and goals and ways we work better together, then we can bring up some of those style conversations. Loss of team spirit is the other one. And I haven't mentioned that as specifically, but it is one of our risks right now, that if people are more spread out, if we're not bringing people together for rallies or conferences or out for drinks or all those things that can help increase camaraderie and team spirit, we have to do it differently. And there's actually a number of suggestions, just having some fun over Zoom calls, other kinds of team building activities. We have to think about how we do it differently, but we still need to bring people back to the mission of our organization, the purpose of your team, so that we can find ways to identify that together and not risk some of that team spirit. Good. So I'm going to give some instructions as we move into our next section, and we're going to tie this to a quick stretch break. We're going to move, really, that was a good chunk of our morning for the first 4. The remaining 5 of our best practices to come into our last hour or so together will go more quickly, because you'll see we've already built on some of these. So I want you to consider, we're going to take a 10-minute stretch break again, but in that, I want you to consider what you pay attention to every day. So on this page where you've got your dashboard, right? What kinds of things are you tracking? This might be literally on your dashboard. Think about a car dashboard. What are the things you have to measure every day so you know what your team is up to, the performance you need to get to? This could be staffing, this could be cares, this could be served, whatever that is. I'm going to ask you to give that a little bit of thought. We are back at 5 after 11 for that conversation. And then I will ask you, we're going to look for some examples of what's on your dashboard. All right, I'll check back in with you in 10 minutes. Thanks, everybody. As people rejoin us here, it was fun to hear a couple of the conversations of what's going on. Got a couple more, it looks like we're back. All right. That what we pay attention to matters, and that focus piece, what we're measuring. I heard a couple of really good examples, right? When we all of a sudden had to separate, it really highlighted our systems issues. It really highlighted who had access to what information in secure ways and just how we got the work done. I would encourage you to think about what you've learned from those lessons. Maybe in March, that was a pretty tough lesson to learn. And I heard a couple of groups mention this of, wow, we had to move that fast, huge investment, had to try and get all of that caught up. Where are you sitting now? Maybe it's gotten into a new flow. People are getting used to it. How could you make that system now work better? Because in scramble mode in March and April, we were doing whatever we needed to do to survive in many of our organizations. Now we've got some experience with that. Now we're 5-6 months later. We see it in process, and part of the reason I'm fascinated with processes as part of this conversation and the way they've evolved this year is there's a concept within processes of it's never worked right since the beginning. And so we don't go back and re-engineer it. We just keep lumping through workarounds, shortcuts. We just make it work. And I think there's something to be said for right now, whether it's dashboards or processes or meetings, that if we've scrambled now for a couple of months and we've settled into a new space, take our current read. Where are we most at risk? Who is not feeling connected? Where are some of the systems issues or process issues or dashboard issues that we couldn't quite get before in the emergency, but we need to circle back now. Maybe something on your to-do list that you just had not been able to get to because you were in crisis mode that now shifts because it's not that you have more time, but you see the priority a little bit differently. And that's really what we're thinking about with a dashboard exercise is what do you need to monitor? So leaders who got moved off-site, then you've got to be able to watch for things differently and don't go micromanagement on me, right? Because people need time and space to be able to get done what they need to get done. If you're co-located, but you can't be around each other, which is many of us on the call today, what do you need to be putting in front of people so that they know we're on track? And it comes back to that comment I said about communication earlier. In the absence of information, people make it up. And it's not usually best case scenario. It's, oh my goodness, we're doomed. Something like that, right? So give them some different information to go on. What are you measuring? How are we doing? How are we coming into fourth quarter? Because when we're nervous, when we're fearful, when that emotion is high, we don't process things the same way. So go back to that grief piece we were talking about earlier. When that emotion is kicked up, and there has certainly been a lot of varied types of emotions this year at different times for different people. When that emotion is queued up, people don't process information the same way. So I need to hear it, see it, put my hands on it. I need to think about it differently. I'm going to hear it differently one day, then I'm going to hear it differently than another day. Lots of things to consider there in terms of how you keep your focus on what's most important and then how you share that out so other people know how we're doing. I really hope in my own kind of work that as we come through this as teams and organizations and we look to what's ever next in 2021, we take some of these lessons learned about transparency and putting tough topics on the table and helping people feel included. I think there's a huge, powerful opportunity to do that. So it was a comment made earlier, and I've got it noted as your number 6 in terms of the power of video and working technology, which just seems kind of ironic to me today. And we know the power of video. And yet, a couple of you have said, and I heard my husband exclaim this the other day, that's it. Why can't anyone just have a phone call these days? Why does it have to say, well, send me a Zoom link, right? He goes, whatever happened to just picking up the phone call? And yeah, it may have been him being grouchy, but you get that piece of it, right? Steve, you were talking about that earlier of phone call versus Zoom time. What's our best way to connect? And this piece that has happened that people don't want to meet. They don't want this kind of engagement. There is a difference, right? Customers, we match to their expectations and we do business in ways that help them engage with us, and we try to meet those expectations. It is different with team members. So now we're starting to see trends with interviewing at a distance. So best practices when interviewing candidates without bringing them in-house first and screening this way. We're seeing onboarding being done via video so that people start learning their jobs as part of the team, but they're socially distant, they're geographically dispersed. And we are seeing more and more need to invest in the technology to get people access, get people cameras when you can find them and buy them. We know that there's been a shortage, but the video changes the entire experience. If you're going to have people engage this way, we just also know, and may have been part of my issue today, bandwidth. When too many people in the same building start tapping on the same bandwidth, what happens? Which is why we see turning off video then ups the bandwidth and makes everybody's connection better. Recognize what that looks like in your organization. I have some organizations that are very effective without the video. I have some who need the video. Really pay attention to the culture and the climate of your team and what's that best combination of when you set the expectation that for this meeting cameras are on, for this meeting cameras are off. What does the level of engagement? Because we've also seen some challenges with multitasking and focus, right? We knew, right? And he said that 3 hours this morning was a long period of time to keep people here and focused, and it's always a challenge for me. But even in your meetings, day to day, week to week, if you've got people dialing in or logging in to attend, how you keep them engaged. I believe it's now put some pressure on us as leaders to run more effective meetings, to be really clear on what the purpose of the meeting is, who needs to be there, what we're accomplishing, and not scheduling them for longer, scheduling them for shorter, more effective meetings. If maybe that's one area you want to work on, as you map out your communication plan that we talked about earlier, and you're listing out your meetings and why you're meeting, make sure you note, is this face-to-face? Is this virtual? As you note the purpose of it, how long does it really need to be? Because in general practice, we tend to throw too many things in a meeting. We put a staff meeting together and we throw way too many things on the agenda. We put the most important things for last when they should be first, when people are fresh and you've got the time. And too many times people can leave a meeting going, wow, I didn't get what I needed out of that because we didn't even get to my part of the agenda. We have to become better meeting leaders. Maybe that for you is a challenge that you want to work on and follow up from today, that in order to keep your team connected on site and virtually, we need to be having more effective meetings. There's some great books out there. There's a book called Death by Meeting. I think it's the best book title ever. Death by Meeting, that by Lencioni. That's a great just reminder, meeting best practices. Meet Like You Mean It, and Virtual Meetings by Kevin Turmel is a favorite of mine. He's a good friend, internationally recognized author, Turmel, T-U-R-M-E-L. You can always drop me a note and I'll send you links and titles as well. There's some nice best practices popping up. I think it's really helpful in our teams if you've got a team that's dispersed, whether it's texting, whether it's email, or whether it's virtual meetings, set the expectations. When do you use the group text? For those of you who've got group texts going on in your teams, when do you email? What gets covered in the meeting? What gets brought up in the meeting? It's really given us an opportunity to clarify those expectations. If we pull this all together and we look at the relationship, it's really been the theme all morning long that to lead and engage teams virtually does take lots of the same skills we knew on site, but it upped the ante this year. The pressure's on, the stress factors are on, we're stretched, we're tired, which really means it's personal. We really need to look at how we build relationships. And as leaders, it always starts with us, but it's not about us. It's about how we make the connection to help people be better versions of themselves, how we build capacity in people and bring out their strengths. What do you need to do to maybe re-engage? If you don't have direct reports, maybe it's with your peers, maybe it's with your boss. Maybe you haven't had the same type of connection with your boss these last few months, and you want to be more intentional about that, setting up a meeting to be able to reconnect, because you both been busy doing what you need to do, and maybe that relationship has been at risk. I love encouraging people to take a relationship, take a moment to assess their top relationships in the workplace setting. Who do you deal with the most? And how would you qualify that relationship? Is it strong and consistent? Is it medium? It's okay? Is it lacking for any reason? Because we know great relationships don't just happen. They take work. We know that in our personal lives. Same thing happens at work, and chances are we spend more time with people at work than we do at home. Making it personal, taking stock of those relationships and considering who needs some of your attention and what could that look like. Similar to the micromanagement conversation earlier, number 8 on your list is trust them. From my own work this year, probably some of the stickier, crunchier situations that I've been asked to be part of have been because the lack of trust has been amplified. where the trust might have already been stretched and that people are not feeling trusted to take care of the work. So in that opposite of that, or similar to that micromanagement conversation earlier, as leaders to engage our teams virtually, we have to trust them, set clear expectations, give people the tools and resources to be successful, yet trust them to do the work. If we have alignment issues on what's priority or how long something should take, then we need to talk about it. But we can't get to clear expectations and key deliverables without trust. And there are different ways companies are handling this. So if someone is working off-site, how do you know they're actually productive? Well, if you set clear expectations and you know what the workload is and they're producing that in the hours given, we've got to trust that their intentions are good. There's a lot of mistrust and a lot of fear that are people really doing what they're supposed to do from home. You have to trust the person that they want to do a good job for you and that they want to do well. So we're still fighting some myths and some skepticism about what does it really mean to work at home. Steve, you had mentioned earlier, right? You've worked at home before COVID. Right? It's not easy to work at home, is it? Until you get those patterns, and not everybody can do it or should do it. What have you learned? Can I put you on the spot for that? What have you learned about working productively from a home office?
I think you just have to kind of stay focused on it. You know, I mean, one thing is to try to be available to, you know, being on the sales side for your customers, for your coworkers. You know, I mean, a lot of that is, you know, when you're in the office directly, you can walk over to the other person and you know, hey, what about this? Or can we look at this or whatever? And so when you're from home, you have to call, you know, I mean, you have to call and talk about it, or you can do an email, but you know, you have to just work a little bit harder that way to do that interaction. And you know, is the timing good with the person on the other end? You don't know if that person's sitting there at their desk able to visit with you, or you know, their hair's on fire and something else is going on. Same thing with customers too. I mean, you really don't have a gauge for those kind of things. So those are some things you have to do, and just be conscious of other people's time. You know, I mean, a lot of times I, you know, try to catch it in the morning, the hot things that have come in, or some of the international people I need to maybe deal with right away. And then at the end of the day, the West Coast people, you know, so I guess just being conscious of everyone else.
Yeah, that awareness is super. And it, you know, again, when people want to do good work, not everybody, and I think that was what 2020 did to us, is there are people who like to work from home and there are people who do not want to work from home. And all of a sudden, for people who moved home and it wasn't their preference, it was not where they wanted to be to work, but they had to, and they had to adapt. So we learned pretty quickly to say, how do you set boundaries? How do you create that space when you don't have the ideal space? How, and I love Steve's point about how do I acknowledge or stay conscientious of other people's time? Might be top on my list, but I can't see that they've got a major issue going on, and right now is not the time for me to reach out to them. And I do think it's important, if you're working remotely or offsite, that you have to stay visible. You have a responsibility to show to others that you're being visible, you're productive. You may have to update more often, even if they're not responding. I might have to understand what my boss thinks about the situation and when they need to hear from me. I might need to at least send notes out to coworkers in a different level of frequency than I might have had before, just to reassure them that I'm here and that they're, you know, whatever I'm working on, what my top priorities. And 2020 gave us a gift of over communication, that we had to communicate more and differently than we've ever had to before. I hope that doesn't go away. I really want us to be strategic about how we lay this out in our teams to come through this stronger and leverage this experience, so that we've cleaned up our processes. We're much more intentional about it. We've even probably found some efficiencies or some gaps that were there that we could close up on who was doing what, how we approach this, because it really is, number 9, helping and supporting frequently. that we know we're in this together. It's a great time to rally cry that when people are starting to lose that team cohesiveness. Now that we've been at this for 5 and 6 months, how do we bring them back together? And especially some of the holiday traditions coming up that we may not be able to enjoy even remotely close to what we did before. What's that look like? So how could we come up with some of those things that our team would just really enjoy and stay connected on? And that last one, number 10, wraps all of these together as we think about the work-life boundaries. So that was the self-care piece we mentioned before. That was the boundaries of when you're working from home, you have to pretend to go to the office. I've heard stories this year, people trying to learn how to do this, and they go outside and they walk around their driveway for a minute and go back in like they're going to work, right? They commute in their own space, because you have to be able to draw that distinction of this is work time, this, you know, this is home time, or knowing at what points you stay connected and at what points you stop checking messages. And so if you're hitting some fatigue or your team is hitting some burnout, it's a great way to recheck. When do you log on? What are the hours expectations? Because people need a break. And there's some great examples out there of leading companies that have said things like no emails after 8 o'clock or before 5 a.m., depending, again, your shift work and your team makeup. But what are the hours of availability that we expect our leaders to have, and how does that change to our team members? Again, hourly versus salary always plays into that. But think about where those boundaries are for you and how we can continue. We're having to relate a little differently. So, you know, this is where, especially when you've got people remote and on camera, just stuff happens, right? Dogs show up. True story. I had a group yesterday, and one of the gals was reporting out part of this training, and she had some stuff to share with the group, and her dog is gnawing on a chew toy with a squeaker in the background. And she finally just loses her composure and says, "That's it. I can't do this report out with this dog squeaking behind me." The funny part was the conversation was about having difficult conversations with your team members. And so one of her very caring coworkers in the chat room said, "Hey, it's time to have a crucial conversation with your dog. Hey, buddy, I'm really glad you're enjoying your chew toy, but could we talk about options that you could enjoy also when I'm not on a conference call, right?" So we just know that there are new challenges, whether it's not muting and unexpected phone calls come in, unexpected things happening that we've had with the gremlins today. Just really understanding a little bit more grace with that. Here's the challenge for this morning. Even as we were talking about the goals for this morning and the content, a lot of the practices are not completely different. But I think what they've done for us as leaders is put us on our tiptoes, that we've got to keep doing this better. Everything that helped make us an effective leader before 2020 still exists. But as we have these combined hybrid teams of some people together, some people separate, some people together who can't even be in the same room together, right? How that changes, we've got to find that creative space to say, this is how we're going to do this better together. Let me pause there. We've got a little bit of time left. I did want to acknowledge Valerie's note. I would happily send out. I have not only that grief graphic, but I have some content that goes with it. I will send that out, and we'll send that out to the participants today. There are other kinds of lists or best practices I could bring up. Is there something that was on your mind today other than wanting to take this time out, hopefully add some things to your leadership toolbox or confirm what you're already doing, which is one of my hopes for that? Anything that was on your mind that you're like, yeah, I'm still struggling with this, or I'd like some ideas on this. We've got a lot of experience in the room, and I'm happy to bring in any other resources that I can.
Hey, Celine, this is Sue Waters with Plastic Recycling in Iowa Falls.
Hi, Sue.
I have a little bit of a reverse scenario for you. So
good.
This information would have been great for me back in April. You know, we wound up having the social distancing, our team's not together, and our team kind of fell apart. So we're all back working together full time. And so I'm struggling trying to rebuild because because a lot of issues kind of did pop up. And I am doing a lot of this information that you've shared today, but there's still a disconnect. And I think part of it is that grieving issue. People miss that social interaction, that one-on-one, and we didn't have it. And now it's trying to rebuild it. And, I'm still struggling with it.
Yeah. Thank you, because I think that's it helps me hearing what you're facing on that. I agree. You still got that grief process going through. People are different stages with it. We're seeing more mental wellness and coping strategies be at risk with this. Then we come back to what I love what you just said, though, is naming reality. Folks, this is hard right now. We're all back together, but we can't be back together in the same ways. And continuing to do some of those things that'll help the team name reality. This is hard. Maybe some of the things that we're working aren't working, or style differences or gaps that keep popping back up. And yet confidence in the team that we can navigate this. Is there another way to get to some of that social connectedness in ways that, we might find even a little bit corny or funky, but they just make us laugh? And, I've seen groups do that with good old baby pictures, which is one of the oldest icebreakers in the book, but just ways to shake it up a little bit. I had a group that did they put a putting green out on it was off to the side on a production floor. And they had some rules around hand sanitizer and the golf tee. But what they did, that whole idea was you had a tee time for 10 minutes sometime in the day, and everybody took that 10 minutes and went over and did their putting green shots and calculated the scores for the day, because they couldn't all do it together, but they all could have a time slot in the day. And I know those sound probably sillier, and I'm not usually a huge fan of them, but there's some reason we've got to connect. And what's that look like? So I love the fact you're acknowledging it's bumpy right now, and it's in that storming piece, right? We're trying to find what's this new normal as we come back together, and just it's going to take some time. Posting things about mental health and mental wellness. If you go to is just another area that I see. So people's coping strategies are better. For those of you who have companies with EAP programs, encouraging people to use those, because our teamwork continues to get better together if we have individuals who are feeling healthier and have outlets, is another thing that comes to mind. There are some great posters available at NAMI.org, NAMI.org, on mental health at work and creating a stronger, more resilient workplace. Some tips for supervisors in dealing with more anxiety and depression and mental wellness issues that we're seeing showing up at work, NAMI.org. Stigma-free workplace is what their program is called for employers. That might provide some of the resources too, just to be able to tap into that. There is a great program, while I'm kind of on that topic, with all of you know about first aid and CPR that certainly has been offered for many, many years. There's a new program called Mental Health First Aid. It's been now out for a couple of years. And mental health first aid is typically free. And so just like you're certified in CPR, you're certified in mental health first aid, which means how to talk somebody through a panic attack, and just have some words to say or some tools in your toolbox for helping people through difficult times. And that would be kind of one of those other areas we just see with leading other people right now of what that looks like. Well, there's a lot packed in there. Sue, keep at it. That's the best thing that I can say to you, is find those ways to help people connect, be stronger, recognize this time will still be a little crunchy on that, and you're going to walk alongside with them on it.
Right. And we did in the past, we would have, like once a month, a potluck lunch. We just all get together, have that social interaction. Of course, we don't do that anymore. But we've always dressed up too for Halloween. So yeah, I'm going to do
Yay, good.
I'm going to say, hey, let's don't lose that tradition. Let's dress up this Halloween, and
good.
Hopefully we'll get a little more reconnection back.
And I heard someone say not too long ago, they did something that I can't remember what the event was at that point. They said, oh, but You know, only 9 people out of our 25 participated. I'm like, did the 9 have fun? Then let them have some fun. Did the other people watch them? Did they have some fun? Yeah. So it doesn't have to be everybody in every way. And I think that's really important. Other people can enjoy it even if they choose not to participate or wear the costume, etc. Good. Other comments or examples or stump your trainer opportunities? To that point, right? This just continues to change. It's different than it was 5 months ago. And I really hope that as we continue to take on this challenge of leadership, as we continue to look forward and how do we move our companies and our teams forward, while it's not getting easier, I want us as leaders to keep being better at this. So if there's some way through Iowa Valley that we can support your efforts, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm going to drop my email in the chat room again. If there's something I can do to just encourage you along the way too, please don't hesitate to reach out. Nisa, do you want to say a couple of things about the Iowa Valley programs and anything else you want to add into the content for today?
Well, I guess I just want to thank everybody for attending this training with Selena. I know I got something out of it and hopefully you'll get some or have some takeaway points today. A lot of you I already work with, but if I don't, please feel free to contact me or Valerie Ruff. She does the same thing I do here at Iowa Valley. We work with businesses to set up trainings with them, whether it's virtual, whether it's on their site. We can customize any type of training you need. Some of you have already worked with Selena, but if you're wanting any of her trainings in the future, she does all kinds of topics, not just the topic we did today, any type of leadership management topic, anything she can do. So you can just contact me and we can work something out and customize it in any way you want to or any way you can. And then I'm just going to throw this out. We're working on and taking applications right now for the new fiscal year for the 260F applications. Feel free to contact Val or I. We'll get you started if you don't have one already and want to get that started. So Val, am I missing anything?
No, Nisa, I think you got it covered well. I just, if you have additional training needs and you want to drill down on what Selena covered today within your organization, we work directly with Selena to make that happen. So we're here to help you with any of your workforce or training needs at Iowa Valley.
Super. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time out today, allowing me to share some ideas with you, stir it up a little bit. It's what you do after the training that reinforces the value this morning. So if we can help along the way, please feel free to let us know. Thank you all. Take care and be well. I'll stick around for as long as anybody wants to stay and talk. So if you're done with us for the day, go on, be productive, celebrate some milestones, be good for your team. Otherwise, if you want to stay around and talk, I'm happy to do that. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care. Be well.
Hey, Selena, this is Chad.
Hi, Chad.
Hey, quick question. I might be,